finalizing a meeting and they'll be here shortly. Please let's give them like 5 minutes or less, then we start. Sorry about this delay, but I hope you understand. Sometimes when we have the senior managers, they have a lot of activities happening and hence the delay. So please bear with us just for a short while and we'll start. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay, but now we are ready to start. And I want to welcome all of you to this webinar on theory of change methodology that is becoming increasingly important or required either when we really want to make impact with our research or when we are applying for grants. And so we are so lucky to have Dr. Isabel. I'll be giving a few more details later. At this moment, I would like to invite our Director of Research, Professor Ochuku, to give a few remarks before we start. Thank you very much. Welcome, Professor Ochuku.
Thank you, Professor Cecilia. Good morning, everyone. My apologies, I've been delayed a little bit, and I'm actually talking to you as I'm getting to the parking, so I apologize for that. I was held up in another meeting. Welcome to this webinar. We are very happy, of course, to have partners and to work with colleagues in other universities to leverage the expertise and strengths that we have so that we can enrich the research that we do and the impact this research has in our communities and globally. I'm not a social scientist, so most of the proposals I write, even some of the work I do, I've never had a situation where I had to do theory of change. But however, I know that it is expertise that we need in a lot of areas, especially those who have found themselves in a situation where they are not able to properly write these sections or understand what it really means. And therefore, having somebody to take us through this process is good for us. And I'm looking forward to a good webinar. And I hope that the participants in this webinar will be able to take out of this training knowledge and skills that they will need as they move forward in terms of course, writing good proposals that can be funded, but also being able to understand why the research that they do is important. How can that be translated, into impact in the society? I don't have much to say. For now, I welcome everybody, and I wish you an engaging seminar. Thank you very much. Over to you, Professor Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Professor Ochuku. Our DVC Research Innovation and Enterprise is supposed to join, or at least she had confirmed, only that she got a physical engagement this morning. She'll be joining us later. But because of time, we will want to move forward. Then she can give her remarks maybe at the end of the presentation. So at this moment, I would like to introduce Professor Isabel Vogel, who is a senior evaluation consultant, and she has over 25 years of experience in international development. So you can imagine we are really lucky to draw from her experiences. She specializes in theory-based evaluation methods, including contribution analysis, clear list evaluation, and systems-informed approaches, and has focused on assessing research innovation and evidence-informed policy across sectors such as climate change, health, agriculture, and humanitarian response in Africa and in Latin America. She has also been with us, that's in the AgriFose2030 program, which some of you are aware of, but most of you might be getting aware of now that we are hosting the hub, the Kenya Hub on Science Translation under the AgriFose2030 program. And so in this program, she has been the monitoring and evaluation and learning advisor for the last 8 years. So you can imagine the amount of experience, the knowledge she has to share with us this morning that we truly need so that we can actually create impact or have impact as researchers. Because for the longest, we are focused on publishing and getting promotions. But I think increasingly, we want to at least have impact, not only at the community level, but also at this point. I would like to, I hope you heard me, did you? You are hearing me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, we
great.
did.
Hear you. Yeah.
Oh,
Yes,
great.
yes,
Yes.
we are hearing you.
At this point, I would like to welcome Dr. Isabel to take us through the theory of change methodology. Thank you very much and welcome, Isabel.
Thank you, Cecilia. And yeah, it's fantastic to see so many people on the call and really excited to be here today. Yeah, so I won't add to that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Cecilia. But yes, it's true. I've been working for a long time in this space, and theory of change has become really one of those approaches that I think as Professor Chuko mentioned, being required in proposals. But actually in AgriFose, we found that theory of change is actually a very kind of enabling and empowering approach for research teams to really help them think through the pathways to impact and what kind of impact and change their research could support, and then kind of design and plan accordingly to build that engagement with stakeholders and really position the research for optimally to be taken up and used and applied in different settings. So that's what we wanted to share with you today, the approach that we've been using in AgriFose. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint slides and hope that the technology is kind. So I'll just start the presentation. So can Cecilia, could you just confirm that you can see the slides and the correct view? Yeah, great, fantastic. Yeah, so Cecilia mentioned we are both part of the AgriFose 2030 program that's been running for I think nearly 10 years now, and we're in a really exciting new phase with setting up hubs in Kenya and Uganda and Zimbabwe, but also bringing in different partners from across the region. And really excited to be talking to you as part of the Kenya hub today. Yeah, I think what's it asking me? Yeah, okay, great. So hopefully you can all still see the slides. So I'll be talking today. It's very introductory and there will be quite a lot of information, but really this is just an introduction to whet your appetite for a longer course that Professor Cecilia and colleagues will be offering as part of the Kenya Hub. So if this kind of sparks your interest, then there will be details shared of how to sign up for the longer course. So first of all, I'm going to be talking about what do we mean when we're talking about research with impact. So as both the earlier speakers noted, it's becoming more and more important in many countries globally for the investment in research to have make a contribution to society or economic development or innovation or whatever it might be. So there's more and more kind of emphasis on thinking about that impact. And this is even starting to apply around basic science. So some of the evaluations I have done have been of research programs that include basic science. And although we're very far upstream, they're still encouraging scientists to think, well, what might be some of the use cases for this research? What's your research going to feed into? What's the next chapter? What's the next stage? So across the board and in all fields, there's an increasing emphasis on impact. So I'll talk a little bit about how we can think about research impact, and then I'll go into the theory of change approach itself, and then we'll have time for some questions and discussions. And the picture there that you can see on the right is actually of a workshop, a theory of change workshop, and I wanted to put that there because I wanted to emphasize that theory of change is really a way of thinking about change, and it involves kind of being quite creative and participatory, and working together in groups with either your research team or with stakeholders and other colleagues to really bring that kind of creative critical thinking about how change might happen and how your research might contribute to that. So yeah, I wanted to start us off thinking about theory of change in that way with that image. Okay, so this is a slide from a quote from an AgriFose impact brief, and it's really saying what I've just said, that there's an increasing recognition of the need for researchers to acquire competencies in planning, managing and supporting change, translating scientific knowledge, and co-creating new practices and policies with actors at different levels. And these are skills that are not usually emphasized in researcher training programs. But as I was saying, there's an increasing kind of demand from funders, but also from researchers themselves to strengthen the ability of their research to make a change in the world. So this is really the essence of the AgriFose program, which is this translating science for being taken up in practices and policies with actors at different levels. So why research with impact? So translating research into some kind of action, whether that's in policy or practice or the business sector, is really important for contributing to societal benefit, and a whole range of different benefits, as I'm sure you're probably already aware, and including the Sustainable Development Goals. So the AgriFose program has a very explicit goal to contribute to some of those SDGs, and using and making sure that research is playing its part and contributing to achieving those collectively. So research projects that are seeking to make a difference in the world can benefit from working with TOC, because it's an approach that builds in kind of stakeholder engagement. It encourages you to think about the impact and then work back to designing your research. So it's really important for planning, for guiding your implementation, and for giving a framework to help track the research process and the influence it's having. So theory of change approach can enhance research projects to have that increased impact and relevance. And the photo there was taken by a colleague of mine who was involved in some climate resilience and agriculture work in Ethiopia. And a big part of that was engaging the community and involving the community in the research process, and providing kind of feedback along the way so that the community was really able, and translating their findings so the community was able to take up those insights to strengthen their own practices and their own resilience to the climate impacts that were happening in their region. And it's a lovely photo, but it's also reminding us of how research can really make a difference. Research contributes in a multiplicity of ways, as you can see from this word cloud. So this comes from some research that was actually done in the UK on research impact, but done on global research. And you can see that some of the big words in that word cloud are policy, impact, sustainability, influence, effectiveness. Changes in there as well, but actionability, transdisciplinarity. So a lot of those words imply kind of engagement beyond the world of research with communities and partners and collaborating on that. So yeah, these are the many pathways through which research can contribute to societal benefit and influence society, culture, the economy, and the environment. And a kind of nice kind of thumbnail definition that I put on the slide there is that impact is the good that researchers do in the world, which is a nice way of thinking about it. But what does research impact kind of look like, and how can we start to frame it and think about it so that we can relate it to our own work? So it's really important, I think, to think of research impact not as a one-off moment. So all the work I've done in my career and research that's done shows that it's actually more of a sequence of different changes at different levels that start to create a pathway and add up to change. So we might start with some shorter term immediate impacts. It's one of the big challenges with research is it's often intangible. We're creating knowledge, we're not necessarily creating things, although some research does create new products, technologies and services and feed into those eventually. But generally the first step is a shift in understanding and awareness, and that people are able to kind of understand an issue perhaps better than they did before, based on your research. And for example, you may be working with stakeholders and you've done research that uncovers the scale and urgency of a problem that they're facing, which needs to be solved, or you might generate evidence that a product or policy might have negative unintended consequences. And as a researcher, you may not have the solution to these problems, but by shining a light on this, people are now kind of more aware of the issue, and that's the start of a change process in itself. And awareness and understanding impacts often lead in time to these next layers of changes, which I'll talk about in a moment. Research can also contribute to capacity or preparedness. So that might be kind of skills or new physical capabilities or financial capabilities that are likely to lead to future benefits, or that can make individuals, groups or organisations better prepared to cope with changes that might impact negatively on them. And these changes then start to feed into, excuse me, start to over time feed into changes around decision making and perhaps behaviour change in specific domains. So it might be around kind of agricultural practices, or maybe around service delivery, or equally might feed into kind of policies and laws and regulations that start to create a different enabling environment to lead to and societal benefits. And then we start to, once we're seeing those kind of changes at kind of mid-level, which might be changes in the enabling environment or changes in decision-making around practice or training or service delivery, once those changes have happened and people begin to do things differently on a larger scale, then the research is contributing to, maybe economic benefit or environmental health and well-being or social and cultural benefits. So this is a obviously super simplistic picture, but it's just trying to convey that idea of research impact being a sequence and a pathway to change, and not just a kind of a one-off moment. And obviously the world is really messy, so my nice, neat linear diagram is very much an abstraction, because research is never starting in a vacuum. Things are happening all the time. So in fact, change can flow from what's already happening in the world back through to our kind of understanding, awareness and attitudes, and our research is kind of engaging at multiple points in these dynamics. But it starts to give us a bit of a frame of how we can think about research impact as a sequence and a pathway, but with lots of feedback loops between them all. So AgriFose2030 was focused on smallholder farmers, and in earlier phases there were some projects around livestock production, for example. So I thought I'd just share here all of the sort of entry points where science and social science knowledge can inform and improve smallholder farmers' livestock production, as an example. So, as I was mentioning, first of all, it can influence decision making and behaviours at levels that shape the enabling environment. So it could be the community itself, municipal and local government, governments at sort of province, county or state level, right through to kind of national, regional and international policies and laws that kind of shape that whole enabling environment for the smallholder farmer. And then there are kind of policies and implementation that's carried out by multiple agencies. So businesses, commercial and private sector, agricultural extension, for example, civil society, research networks, and then finally science and social science, which can actually feed into ordinary people's smallholder farmer communities themselves, and how they sort of conduct their farming and livestock practices. And that's actually been a really big focus and an entry point for AgriFose2030, working with smallholder farmers and communities, women and men themselves, and translating science into practices that are easily taken up by those communities. So yeah, many kind of entry points and ways that research can have an influence and have an impact. So where does theory of change come in? And it's often shortened to TOC because it's a long name for a method, but it's an approach that can help us kind of map out this pathway to research impact. And this cartoon, I think, is particularly pertinent because certainly in proposals and when we're being asked to talk about impact, we have our project on one side, and then a kind of a really nice sort of big scale concept of impact on the other side, but not really anything articulated about how we're going to get there. And that was really why, certainly from the kind of 1980s onwards, evaluators and funders and lots of other people started to kind of say, well, can we say more about what that gap is, what step 2 is? And that's really where theory of change came from, as an approach to help us kind of think through and articulate and describe, at least conceptually, how our research and our activities are going to contribute to certain impact. So let's go on and talk about what is theory of change, which is it's a kind of a very strange name, I think, because often when you talk to researchers, particularly, people are like, well, is it going to tie us down to one theory of how change happens? So I think it's not the best name for it, because that's not actually what theory of change is going to do. But it's the name that's stuck, so we have to kind of live with it. In fact, what theory of change is encouraging us to do is to think about the multiple theories that are actually informing all of our ideas and beliefs about how change might happen and what actions might bring that about. So in a sense, theories of change are everywhere, but they're kind of invisible, they're intuitive, or they're subconscious, and we're not really necessarily aware that a particular perspective that we hold is really informing our actions and how we might understand change. So all of these beliefs are influenced by our personal, professional, cultural factors, and they shape our strategies. But actually, if we're not aware of them, they can really create blind spots and biases that might affect the kind of outcomes and change. that we might bring. And a really simple example is really, you know, a nutritionist may see a problem and think of solutions purely from the perspective of nutrition, and an architect will look at the same problem in society, and may come up with solutions that are very much coming from the architecture perspective, and that's natural. But most of the challenges and problems that are prompting our research, our desire to understand more and contribute, is a very complex world, and there are multiple kind of perspectives needed to really understand what that problem is and what the solutions might be. So reflecting on and discussing these kind of theories and mental models that we hold with others can help us to kind of have a more rounded, holistic approach to achieving meaningful change. And then I think that cartoon sums it up really. Yeah, maybe before we started building a bridge, we should have taken a step back and thought about the context and the challenge and the problem, and a boat might have been a better solution. So it's a kind of simple way of saying that, you know, we often start projects with a fixed idea of what we want to do, and that might not always be the right thing if we haven't looked closely at that context and brought kind of multiple perspective and multiple theories to that to understand what's really needed to support change. And we also need to, you know, have theory of change helps us to bring out our kind of mental models and assumptions to the surface and critically interrogate them and test them. Yeah, and here the assumption was that a bridge is always best, but it wasn't in this example. So if we have theories of change with a small t everywhere, what is theory of change as the methodology that we're talking about to try and bring all this this thinking out and to the surface? So it's a structured method or an approach to a group-based critical reflection. And theory of change as an approach encourages you to really explore that challenging situation that's kind of, you know, prompting our research or our project, and really understand what's going on in that situation, what's happening in the wider systems, and how change could happen to address that and improve that situation. And theory of change, then having that kind of group discussion and that critical reflection and analysis, then leads you to explain how your initiative might contribute to this kind of potential sequence of changes that will bring about the change that we're looking for in that, and taking in mind the wider systems. So it is a process to explicitly identify how projects and programs are supposed to work to address a specific problem, and setting out different possible sequences of steps from the intervention right through to the desired set of outcomes. So to simplify that, theory of change does have three different aspects to it as the methodology. So it's that critical thinking about change and the wider system, and that's really kind of the overall approach. That's the essence of what it's about. And then it takes you through a systematic process of analysis. So and doing that kind of collectively with appropriate people to really support that kind of learning and adaptation and understanding change, and how your initiative is going to contribute to that. And then it's also a set of products that come out of that collective discussion and critical reflection. So we have narratives, we have change pathway diagrams. Some people develop whole system maps as part of their theory of change thinking, and particularly a kind of stakeholder analysis of who and what will be involved in the change process. Often that kind of workshop discussion is often translated into a kind of a change pathway diagram, a bit like this. This one's quite linear. I don't not showing it as a great example. But those of you who have come across theory of change before will probably be familiar with these kinds of flow diagrams that often arise from the process. I think really key to making theory of change an effective process is having a good range of appropriate participation. So not just the research team, but dialogue and consultation with stakeholders, whether those are community members or policy makers, so that there is kind of good ownership of the agreed pathway to change. Secondly, having a comprehensive analysis, so having really looked at the context and different perspectives on that, and having had that good group discussion and analysis. And then it's really critical that the theory of change is continued to be used and reflected. So it's not a kind of a one-off process, but you keep coming back to it as a kind of a living framework for making sense of things, for seeing, well, is our pathway still unfolding the way we thought it was going to? Has something different happened in the context? So allowing you to take a step back from your project and using it to kind of have another round of critical thinking. So theories of change are intended to be reviewed and updated and adapted through your learning over time. Arguably, the most important aspect of theory of change and theory of change thinking is this focus on assumptions. And assumptions are defined very broadly in the theory of change methodology. It's really kind of what we think is true, or maybe is accepted as true in that context, or it could be some factor about which we're really uncertain. But assumptions are those kinds of multiple mini theories that are floating around in our team and in ourselves, and that are shaped by those kind of values, beliefs, experiences, and education that are very implicit or might be subjective and quite biased. And the cartoon there illustrates all of perhaps the different ways that a pig could be looked at. So a philosophical kind of meditation, it might prompt that. People may have religious views on the pig. An artist may see it as an object to paint. It's obviously food from other perspectives, and livelihoods from another perspective. So those different assumptions that we can make about things that are in the world, those are what theory of change is really challenging us to bring out, discuss, challenge, and explore in order to really strengthen our thinking about change and our ability to influence it. So yeah, there we go. So it helps us to make assumptions, theories, and worldviews explicit and explore them with people who bring different perspectives. I've talked a lot in the abstract about kind of what theory of change is about as a way of thinking. And this slide sets out the kind of structured, systematic thought process that you should take to really get a good beneficial theory of change. And this is the approach that I use when I work with different groups. There are other kind of slight variations on this. I think one of the challenges with theory of change is that it's not a standardized approach. So there are kind of different variations. But over time, this is the kind of sequence of thinking that I've found to be most effective and that we've used in AgriFose. So first of all, it's really important to clarify your purpose for using theory of change, because that will really frame the breadth of the process that you want to design. So it could be that you're very much at the beginning of designing your project, and actually you want to do a kind of full process. You want to go and talk to stakeholders and think about change. You want to look at really do a kind of in-depth analysis, the context and the setting that you're in. You want to develop a kind of a full pathway. So it's going to be, if you're really kind of at the beginning of a process, you may want to invest in kind of quite a lot of time to bring people together to think through theory of change. It may be a different situation where you're coming perhaps halfway through a project or an initiative, and maybe there hasn't been very much theory of change thinking. Things are going a bit wrong in the project. That kind of clarity of focus on change and what you need to do to support it isn't there. So actually we need to take a step back and perhaps try and retrofit and articulate what that theory of change has been. And that might be a more kind of summarized process, but you still want to get some good quality thinking, but it may not be there may not be time or space to do such a broad process. But you definitely want to kind of do the that you're coming assessment, which is the situation I often find myself in as an evaluator. And perhaps that theory of change is not very clear, or it's very summarized and high level. And so we would like to do some theory of change thinking, but obviously everyone's very busy. And so we need to find kind of a good way to follow these steps, but in quite an efficient way. So there's different choices to be made depending on your purpose for working with theory of change. So that's what I always get out of it. Once we've established that, you can then dive into the process proper, and that step 2 is to really get some depth into describing the challenge and the context, and the kind of envisioned future situation that you want to contribute to. So what is that end goal, and that you want to contribute to, that framing and definition of impact. So you're looking at the challenge, but trying to flip that then to describe what that vision of the change that you want. And that's going to provide you with a kind of a guiding light through designing your project and implementation. And sometimes for some initiatives, that's enough to just really have a very clear picture of the impact you want to contribute to, and then feeding that into your design and implementation. But usually we need more articulation of that. So we would then continue the process. And the next step after that is to, we've been thinking about the future and the desired situation we want to contribute to and the impact. In step 3, we come back to our current context, and looking at exactly what's happening around that issue. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the actor groups? And we really want a thorough analysis of that context and what's going on today, what the blockers are to improvements, what are some of the factors that are driving the kind of negative situation, and doing a good in-depth analysis of that. And there are different tools and techniques that we can bring. So in that sense, theory of change is quite methods neutral. At each stage, you can just bring in whatever range of techniques are most useful to work through that step. Step 4 is where we look at that whole kind of analysis of the context, and we start to try and make sense of that and saying, okay, well, we can't affect everything. Are there some kind of clear entry points for our initiative or for our research? Maybe there's a real gap in understanding a particular process, or a real gap in understanding and knowledge about a particular driver of some of these negative factors. And so we've tried to pick some of the entry points that we're going to work on in that wider context. I think the numbering has gone a bit wrong on this diagram, so apologies for that. The next step would be step 5. So once you've identified those entry points, we've got that kind of ultimate goal and that impact, we then start to think about mapping the pathways to that that future situation. So what might be the sequence of changes? So thinking about changes in knowledge and awareness, changes in kind of capacity, changes in decision making that then might lead on to that longer term change that we want to contribute to. The next step after that, which would be step 6, you have created then a framework of a sequence of changes that allows you to quite easily say, okay, well, can we put in some monitoring and evaluation and learning markers, what's going to help us understand that we're making progress in the right direction, so we can then use it to define those MEL priorities and process. And then the final step in this approach is to make sure you're using that theory of change for regular critical reflection as you kind of go through and implement, and you're co-creating with communities or co-creating with other stakeholders, to keep coming back to your theory of change and say, maybe there's an assumption that we actually now know a lot more about, or there's a whole new factor that we hadn't anticipated that we now need to think about. Maybe we've had a lot of change and a lot of outcomes rapidly, so we need to kind of say, okay, we've made further progress than we thought. So kind of can we move faster along our pathway to change? So that's really the whole approach, and that the training course takes you through each of those steps in a lot more detail. I've done it in quite a rush here. But just to illustrate that you can bring many different tools and methods to help you work through each of these steps. So there are techniques where we can think about, bringing some future thinking to help us really envision that impact in a tangible way. There are tools that we can use to help us really analyze the current context. That one there is a rich picture, which we talk about on the course. That can be all kinds of other analytical tools that we can bring. Thinking about how change happens. There are lots of different theories and models that we can draw on to help inform our thinking. And also stakeholder engagement and stakeholder mapping tools that are really key. There are different ways that we can use to actually map our pathways to the future vision, whether it's kind of more of a flow chart type model or a very creative model. There are lots of different approaches and ways of doing that. And then, again, kind of building in that learning and adaptation and monitoring. And in AgriFose, we use a set of MEL tools that we tried to make them so they're very useful to the researchers. So it's really prompting that reflective process. Lots and lots of different options, and we talk about a lot of them in the course. Just to be able to kind of leave you with something kind of simpler, I guess, to get started with on the webinar. I think this is a really nice and accessible kind of framework to get you started. So it's by Sarah Morton, who is based in Edinburgh in Scotland, and she has done a lot of work on research impact. And she developed this approach, which I've put the reference there in the slide. And she kind of breaks down the sequence of change into just kind of 3 stages. So it's a little bit more accessible. So we're thinking about research uptake on that left-hand side, research use and research impact, but it's keeping that concept of a sequence of change. And then in that middle column, starting with kind of outputs and activities. So that's what we actually do in our research. We then go on to engage and involve stakeholders. They then kind of react and have changes in their awareness. So that's where we're starting to see research uptake. That then leads on to changes in knowledge or skills. Oh, could somebody mute, please?
Next week. Sorry.
Oh, hello, you're not muted. We can hear your conversation. Thank you. And that leads on to changes in knowledge or skills. And then where we start to see research use, we see changes in behaviour or practices. And then that leads on to outcomes and contribution. And on the right-hand side, there are some ideas for how you might kind of track that change. So looking at kind of observed reactions and changes in awareness by the users. Maybe there are kind of some learning measures or capacity change measures, and so on. And you can dive into her paper. But I think using this kind of frame and trying to map how your research might contribute to each of those stages in that sequence, I think is a really good starting point to get your theory of change thinking going. And here are some examples from some of the AgriFose research translation projects. And these are their kind of envisioned long-term change statements, their future change statements that have guided their theories of change and their project strategies. So these are two projects actually from the Uganda context, and where there's one AgriFose project on resilient urban food systems, and their change statement that in step 2 in the sequence that I was just sharing, what they've developed as their kind of impact and their guiding light is more gender responsive resilience to floods and droughts. And by the end of the project, smallholder farmers, particularly women and youth involved in horticultural production, and a diversity of enterprises in Mbale and Kasese city regions, respectively, will be better able to withstand the shocks and stresses from increasing frequency and severity of droughts and floods. And so that's the impact they want to contribute to. So then that's informed the whole design of their research and science translation project, which is very much an emphasis on kind of co-producing solutions with the researchers bringing science and the smallholder farmers bringing their knowledge and combining that to work together to change awareness, build skills, build capacities, and contribute to strengthening their enterprises and production. And similarly, there's another project working with women on value addition, and their change statement is improved skills, confidence, and capacity of women and youth among traditional pastoral communities in Western Uganda to run successful businesses and have more supportive relations across gender and generations. So that's the impact that they want to contribute to. And again, they've developed this whole sequence and a pathway of change, which is informed the design of their project in the same way, and working through the theory of change steps. So again, we can give more examples in the training course. This is the diagram. There is a lot more behind it, but this is a diagram of the AgriFose, the program as a whole, its impact pathway, and going right from the impact that we want to contribute to, which is probably too small for you to read, which is really contributing to SDG 1, no poverty, and SDG 2, zero hunger on the right-hand side, and working backwards through a whole sequence of changes that need to happen in the wider systems, right through to changes in knowledge and awareness of communities and decision makers on the kind of left-hand side of the diagram. So I'm getting to the end now. I think I've hit you with a huge amount of information. I think theory of change can feel really abstract when I'm just talking about it now. But actually, we've found that once you start the process, it's much more intuitive, and it is really a process that is much better kind of learning by doing than somebody kind of talking to you. But I hope this has been enough to whet your appetite and prompt your interest in joining the longer course that Prof. Cecilia will share details about. So I'm going to stop there because I've spoken for quite long enough, and open the floor to some questions and discussion. So really be great to hear if you've come across theory of change before, can you see opportunities with working with TOC in your research project. Maybe you can only see challenges, but it would still be great to hear some of those as well. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. I'll open the floor now.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for that great presentation and for the insights that you have brought to this meeting today. And I can see a number of questions on the chat, but this session, I think Justin Nyaga will help you at least read out some of the questions even before we go to the hands that have been put up. Justin, please come in now and help us with guiding this session, starting with what we have on the charts.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
I want to thank Isabel for agreeing to come and take us through this TOC, and especially members of our academic staff from the 3 universities within the hub. We can start with the questions that I see on the chat. Isabel, somebody is asking, I think I can start with the one from the bottom. Somebody saying empowerment of women and other marginalized is very strategic. Are they involved in the design of the projects? There is another one who is asking, would I be correct to say that TOC is a pathway for a project to achieve its long-term goal? And another one is asking, what's the conceptual difference between a change statement and a mission/vision statement? I think, Isabel, you can start by responding to those, then we can go to the others.
Thank you very much, Justin. So those are some great questions, and I'll start with the empowerment of women question. So the different AgriFose projects, all in the different hubs, are all working with communities. So they have been involved in the design of the project, and I think it's been something that for me has been really exciting to see. That I think the process has been that the project team has done a little bit of theory of change thinking collectively, but then they have gone to the communities and worked in that particular case with the women's groups and kind of sharing, this is how we see the change process. How do you see it? And it really was quite transformative for the team, I think, to really open the design process to that co-production, because they started to see things very differently and actually changed the design of the original design that they had. So keeping that kind of openness and flexibility to talk to women and some of the other marginalized groups that they really they wanted the project to benefit has and using theory of change thinking was really transformative in their own view of their project, and is translating into actually a lot of change being supported through that project. The second question was, so Agnes, you are correct to say that that's another way of thinking about it, that TOC is a way of thinking through and articulating that pathway for the project to achieve its long-term goal, but really starting not from what we want to do, but flipping that around to, what's the change that we want to see, and having kind of in-depth conversations, as in the women's project in Uganda, to then work back and say, well, okay, so what's the optimal thing that we can do then? And then that leads me on to Jeffrey's question about the conceptual difference between a change statement and a mission vision statement. I would say they're quite in a similar space, but often a mission vision statement, which comes from strategic thinking, is very much about what we want to do and about our organization. Whereas in theory of change, the change statement is about the change we want to see out there with the communities that we're working with, or the stakeholders. So it's about that change and about the people involved in that change and who might benefit from that change. So it's less about us. I think that would be the kind of critical conceptual difference. So I think those were the first three questions, Justin. I can see there's a lot more coming on.
Yes, yes, Isabel. Yeah, and Daniel is asking what is made in full. Daniel, that's monitoring, evaluation, and learning. I think that's what it means. And Faith is asking, how can one join the 3-week course? Faith, we will be sending out adverts to all academic members of staff in the 3 different universities, and you will have an opportunity to apply for those, and then we will be able to let you know whether you are selected or not. But of course, attending this first webinar gives you a priority to be selected. Isabel, I forgot to read one question from UHS. I don't know. I think there's somebody logged in like that. It says, could this TOC be used to mitigate disasters in Nairobi and other areas? I think you can respond to that together with,
Yeah, I think there's another question about, there's another question about, could it be used in a school context? So I think, I mean, theory of change by itself is not going to, I guess, make change happen. What it's doing is helping the people involved in projects, and there's a project to help mitigate disasters in Nairobi, or the project in the school setting that the other colleague has asked about. What it can do is to help you be much more kind of rigorous in thinking through, what is the change we're looking for, what might be the kind of sequence of smaller changes that lead to that, and therefore how is our kind of project going to contribute to that, and really try to work to bring about that sequence of changes that leads to that goal. So it should help you have a kind of much more focused project to help kind of mitigate disasters. So it can be applied in any setting, in any for any kind of impact. It's not just for research; it's also for interventions. So it's a kind of a technique you can take to any setting, I think would be my answer.
Yes, thank you very much, Isabel. I can't see more questions on there.
Maybe Justin, you can allow the participants whose hands are up to ask questions.
Yes.
Yeah, even as we look at the chat.
Yeah, there's a few hands up, I think.
I see Kenneth Mbongi. We can start with you, Kenneth. Please go.
All right. Thank you very much, the moderator, and thank you very much, Isabel. I'm struggling to put on my camera. I think there is a challenge, but nevertheless, let me just go ahead. Now, my name is Kenneth Mbongi. Kenneth Mbongi. I'm currently the Associate Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences here at the University of Nairobi. But I am a historian. I work for the Department of History and Archaeology here. And I look at mainly things that touch on the history of biomedicine in Africa and its interface with the state. And probably the question I'm going to ask could somehow be biased towards that kind of direction. It's not really a question, but I wanted to give two broad reflections, and if you might want to respond to them. The first one is, the TOC model is commendable. If you ask me, it emphasizes systematic analysis, participation, and some kind of internarrative learning. But one may question, to some extent, its universality. I don't know whether you could agree with me that the language of change pathways, assumptions, and strategic products really reflect largely technocratic and some kind of programmatic worldview rooted in contemporary development practice. Yet, and I know this because I'm a historian, societies are historically textured and culturally diverse. And social transformation in many cases often unfolds really through informal institutions, moral authority, and historical memory, rather than through linear or diagrammatic pathways, presumed by this model. So we see while the TOC offers analytical clarity, it may risk, in my view, over systemizing social change, which in reality is frequently nonlinear, most of the time contingent, and shaped by cultural idioms that are beyond the reach of structured planning. I don't know what your thought would be. That's the first one, which deals with some kind of inhibitions around universality. The second one is the framework appears primarily designed for human social systems. If that's the case, then it raises questions about how applicable it could be to non-human or ecological systems. While it could theoretically be extended to things like environmental or ecological contexts, such as agricultural systems or climate adaptation, nature itself does not operate through articulated assumptions, I guess, stakeholder negotiations or strategic narratives. So non-human systems follow biological and ecological logics rather than deliberative social planning. So consequently, what you could find is to apply TOC to such domains requires what I see as careful translation. Humans may design interventions around ecological processes, but the processes themselves remain indifferent to the analytical frameworks humans impose upon them. So I don't know, what will be your comment on those two reflections?
Yeah, so thank you very, very much, Professor Mbungi. I think these are very well expressed critiques that have been made against theory of change, and I think, I think they're very accurate, and it is a debate, I think, ongoing. So you're completely right that the language does reflect kind of contemporary development practice. It's very much imbued with some of these ideas about, we're going to intervene and in a process and cause a change, and that somehow we can kind of direct that change. And I think it reflects the kind of dual histories of theory of change as an approach, which I didn't really go into in the presentation. But one of the strands of where theory of change has come from is very much from this kind of deliberative social planning and kind of trends in sort of public management that came out in the 90s. But what was really interesting is that there was a parallel trend that civil societies kind of adopted theory of change as an approach, because what really resonated with them was the critical reflection aspect. And they brought kind of much more concepts from kind of the Paulo Freire tradition of, if you can kind of help people reflect on and see the systems that are around them, you can strengthen their agency to affect change that is beneficial to them. So although theory of change, one route it came in was from this top-down, very managerial development context, and that's reflected in some of the concepts in the language. It's had also kind of huge enrichment and take up and traction from kind of civil society and communities. And so I completely would accept that, yeah, a lot of the language is imbued with these concepts of linear change and somehow we can manage it and everything is orderly. But certainly much more recent evolutions are trying to find ways of getting the benefit of the critical thinking, and pushing back against some of that managerial linear concept. So there are lots of versions of theory of change that are bringing kind of systems thinking, and non-linearity and uncertainty. And I would say it's quite a flexible framework so that you can bring in many different things and kind of really make it your own and your own version. Yeah, and I mean, I was working recently with a group of social scientists and scientists from across many African countries who are very interested in decolonializing theory of change, but keeping somehow the value of that critical thinking process, which can really be a catalyst for agency. But you know, I think your critiques are extremely well made and resonate with a lot of the critiques in the wider sector. But I think what people are finding is that there is something valuable in theory of change, that is worth finding ways to make it applicable to a different context, different countries, different kind of cultural ways of thinking about the world. So pushing at those, you know, making it more universally applicable. And then your point about kind of it's designed for human social systems. I think that's also a very fair observation, and that non-human systems kind of don't behave in that kind of orderly way that we would hope. I guess where theory of change comes in is that it's really about the interface of humans and natural systems, particularly when we're looking at work being done in, you know, around resilience or climate change or agriculture, and working with ecosystems. And I think, yeah, I think it's important not to expect theory of change to be applicable to everything, but where there is some kind of initiative or an intervention to improve how humans are working with their ecosystems, and finding that balance, then theory of change thinking can be helpful, and bringing in and acknowledging that kind of unmanageability of natural systems, and being kind of quite explicit about that as an area of uncertainty when you're planning your activity and thinking about bringing that theory of change thinking. So I think those are really great observations, which I'm really happy you made, and it's really diving into some of the nuances and the broader context for theory of change. And I think they're fair critiques. Just from a practitioner perspective, I keep seeing that there's something about theory of change that really resonates with people, and we can flex the approach and make it kind of fit different settings, and try and people are finding ways to make it applicable and get the benefit of the approach. That's a very long answer, so
No,
but I
thank
hope
you.
that was
No,
interesting.
it's really very eye-opening, and I hear you emphasizing issues of contextualization and relativity in our thinking, which is really quite critical. And a few years back, I was involved in a project on the designing of best practice in the deployment of genetically modified mosquitoes as a control for malaria and dengue. And these questions came up. There are some elements which are actually resonate with what we are now calling theory of change that we dealt with. But then we realized that contextualizing and looking at a number of things relatively helped us to do quite meaningful community engagement aspects, because that is the portion that I was involved in. No, thank you. Your reflections are extremely important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great questions and reflections. Thank you for sharing them.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, we can have the question from Wakori McDonald.
Thank you, our moderator and our facilitator. It is so exciting to have this kind of engagement. The first one is more of a request. I've heard from what you have said that you'll be targeting the faculty members of the 3 universities. Personally, I'm a PhD student from University of Embu, so I was requesting if it is possible you open up also to PhD and master students, because again, we actually in the industry, despite being students, such knowledge can be of help to us. Number 2, I wanted to ask, what is the point of departure between the theory of change and action-based research? Because I'm looking at it and seeing quite a lot of similarity. So maybe if you may help us understand, or is it synonymous? Those are the 2 questions I had. Thank you.
So I think the first question is a question for the colleagues from the hub. So Prof. Cecilia and Prof. Justin, about who can attend the course.
Yeah. I can say that when we do the advert, our main target is young early career researchers, and PhD students are part of that. So it's going to be open to at least a PhD student. If we open it to master students, that may be too much for us to take. But yes, at least for PhD students, we will be part of those invited to apply. I think that's what I can say for now. Maybe Cecilia, yes.
To add to what Justin has said, we have not so much resources to bring everybody on board, but what we are thinking about is building a critical mass of people who can actually offer these trainings, but also going forward, integrating this theory of change training in our curricula. So yes, we will get PhD students, but maybe not as many as the staff to start with. And then as we move forward and we integrate this in our systems, then it becomes a university or universities curricula or courses that are offered, so that we are able to cover everyone and to integrate it, especially in our graduate student training modules. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then to answer the second question about the point of departure with action research, I think they're very aligned. I think a theory of change is obviously, drawn from lots of different approaches already there, and action research, I think, is very much aligned with the kind of mode of theory of change thinking, that you kind of develop the thinking about how you might contribute to impact, what that pathway might be, all the feedback loops, and then using action research as you kind of implement, to be learning more about the uncertainties, the assumptions, how change is actually unfolding. So I think they're very compatible. I'd need to kind of look into it a bit more as to the kind of streams of development, but I'm sure that the people who kind of developed theory of change would have very much looked at action research. In the I guess kind of governance type work, where they use a lot of kind of iterative approaches, then action research and theory of change are very, very much used there, I think, to, as you kind of do an activity, reflect on what people's responses are to that, bring it back to that kind of high level framework of what that pathway to change might be, and keep iterating and adapting. So I think they're quite aligned and compatible. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
I think there was a comment, Justin, in the in the chat that somebody asked about kind of has there been kind of some studies on TOC usage in research, and in fact one of our AgriFossa teams has kind of written an article based on their own experience, so I've put the link there, and there are other articles that we can share on how kind of theory of change, the experience of theory of change and the difference that it's made.
Thank you, Isabel. I don't know whether you can comment about the other. Somebody is asking whether the theory of change is aligned. Does the theory of change align better with Kaizen approach or the big leap thinking? I don't know whether you can maybe comment on that.
I'm not familiar with the Kaizen approach, and I'm not sure what's meant by big leap thinking either. But I think there are many approaches that bring this kind of trying to really articulate and think through the change, and then feeding that back into the design of your initiative. But yeah, perhaps the questioner could explain a little bit more, because I'm not familiar with the Kaizen approach.
Yeah, there's another one similar to that, whether there is a relationship between the TOC and the innovation platforms approach. I have also not heard about that. I don't know whether you have, maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, I don't, again, it's not an area, I mean, I'm familiar with innovation platforms, but I don't know exactly how, if there's a kind of a specific approach or methodology for setting that up. I think in my experience, kind of theory of change thinking is applicable in lots of these different settings if you adapt it. So my understanding of an innovation platform is again this quite sort of iterative approach and bringing stakeholders together to kind of collectively look at challenges and collectively come up with kind of solutions and then iterate solutions around them. So you can see a lot of points of connection with theory of change thinking around that. So I guess the bigger message is it's often not an either or, that you can take. This is why I kind of I'm quite keen to get people to articulate their purpose for working with theory of change, because maybe there's just certain ideas or elements that you want to take from it to contextualize to your approach. But there's a lot of the ways of thinking that align well with things like innovation platform or the or action research, as we were just mentioning. And that's why I was making the point that it's more of a framework for thinking rather than being like a method. And that's why I tend to call it an approach rather than a method, because it's kind of broader and much more flexible.
Sorry, Justin, I think we have Isabel for the next 4 minutes. Maybe you take one more, then the others can write their questions and concerns. And then Isabel will be able to respond, because Isabel is part of our team going forward. And as we start giving more and more webinars through the hub, we will see which questions or concerns are coming from members that might also need another webinar or another workshop online. So please take one more from the floor, and then the others we can follow later with Isabel. Thank you.
Sure, thank you so very much, Cecilia. Let's get the question by Douglas Mitieka, and then I think the other questions that have been put on the chat. Esther, I think Nekes, I think is recording them, and we are going to handle them. I see most of them are about the courses that we are about to start, and who to attend and who can attend and how that is going. Cecilia explained a bit about that, but we explain more if there are any specifics that you want to know. Let's have the question from Douglas, and I think we close the question and answer session. Thank you, Douglas, please. Douglas Mitieka, your hand is up.
You may be muted, Douglas.
Oh,
If
okay,
Douglas
now.
is not in, maybe if Isabel,
Maybe
you
it's,
have seen another on the chat, you can quickly respond before you leave. But we will stay back, colleagues, so that we make some other announcements so that we release Isabel, but we stay back for more information about the hub and how we are pushing forward these courses. Thank you.
okay. Yeah, I think Douglas, you need to unmute. You can go if you are able to talk now. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
my head was. Oh, it's not me. Sorry, I see it's not me. Thank you.
Okay. Kenneth Obongi, did you have a question? Another question? Your hand is up. Okay. If not, then
No,
I
not
think we
quite.
take.
Not quite. That's an old one. That's an old one. I was done. Thank you very much.
Okay, then.
Okay, so Justin, I think there's one last question from Noreen Kaleji in the chat about how can the TOC influence the research design so that the study actually tests and examines the assumptions within it, which I think is a great question. And it's exactly why I would recommend that you develop a theory of or develop your theory of change thinking and framework at the design stage. Because the example that I was giving about the AgriFose, well, I think all the AgriFose projects, that when they went to the communities that they wanted to work with, a lot of the assumptions that they had initially made, became immediately obvious that they needed to kind of reframe them. And some of the assumptions were so critical to the change process that they needed to be brought into the research design so that they could really explore and understand those. So things about kind of how you can support kind of changes around gender relations and gender norms in a community became very central to the actual research process, rather than a kind of an assumption or an uncertainty to the side of the research process. So theory of change can be very powerful to help your research design process, so that you're really focused on the relevant questions and not just perhaps the questions that you thought about from your own team's perspective, but by going out and engaging with the stakeholders and involving them in the design, it really kind of reframed them and they became quite central. So I think that was a great question to conclude on. So yeah, bringing that kind of the theory of change thinking, that focus on how change might happen and how you might be able to support it, and really contextualizing that as the earlier speaker was encouraging us to do, I think is really key and a good point to finish on. So yeah, so I think it's been great. It's been a really great discussion. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm really excited for the course. So yeah, thank you very much, Justin. Back to you.
Thank you, and back to you, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for the time. Please allow us to come back to you in case we need you for further engagement. And so you are free to leave when you feel that you should, but otherwise you can hold on if you have a few minutes. And now we go back to our colleagues. Thanks, Isabel, and see you soon. Yeah, so members, thank you very, very much for taking time to join this webinar. I think to us, it's the foundation of the courses that we'll be delivering at the Hub. And maybe for those who have not, who are not aware, the University of Nairobi is hosting a Kenya Science Translation Hub. And within the hub, we are supposed to enhance or work with researchers to enhance their capacities in ensuring that their research creates impact. So it's research for impact. And through that, we are running 3 courses. That's the theory of change methodology, the systematic review course, as well as the science translation to inform policy and practice. So this will run for 2.5 years. I think we have done 1 year trying to set up the hub. And apart from the courses, we are also engaged in a project, which is a community project running in Kisumu and in Embu. And this is where we are really applying the theory of change methodology in order to, we implement what has been given as a course to enhance our learning more, but also to really create impact and to influence policy and practice. So what's going to happen in the coming days, we are going to send out a call for people to apply first of all to the theory of change course, then we will run the systematic and then the translation course. So depending on the available resources, we might get up to 30, but remember the hub is has been constituted so we hope we can run 2 cohorts for each of the courses, depending on the resources. And then after that, we hope that some of the faculties and schools can pick these modules and host them or run them through their faculties or schools. And at the end, we will want to have this incorporated, these courses or modules incorporated in our curricula of training, especially at the graduate level. That's master's and postgraduate levels. Now, I think Nekesa shared a form for us to evaluate the webinar. And if there are any questions, yeah, people can ask questions, make comments, and yeah, before we can close down.
Yeah, just a quick one, Doc. This McDonald
please.
again. Now, I've seen from the chat they're saying the criteria will be someone with 5 years of experience in research. And there was also a comment on you'll allow PhD candidates also to apply. Is it conflicting? Because PhD, we are barely 1 year, 2 years into program. So maybe you can clarify that. I'm really much intrigued in that.
Yeah, I said up to 5 years, that means 0 to 5. And PhD students fall on that. And then, as I said, we are targeting more of the staff because we want to be like trainers going forward. And then we want to pick a few PhD students to join the cohorts. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Somebody has also asked about the other 2 courses. That's translation, that's science translation to inform policy and practice. How do you break down that very high science language to a language that can be understood by our members of parliament, the general public, or even media, if you want to influence or cause impact? And then the other one is systematic reviews, because we have a lot of good research that has gone into publications, either in journals or in books, or that's in our thesis. But really, it's just that. How can we then break that down or synthesize that and use it to inform policy making or review, but also the practices out there and different, for the different stakeholders? Another question? Please continue giving feedback.
Yes. Maybe,
Yeah.
Prof, mine isn't a question, but what I see as some form of plea. I know that the perception out there might be that this is a course meant for sort of what is loosely and of course wrongly called pure science based people. But maybe we need to pitch it in such a way that we will also attract a few colleagues from social science and the humanities, because if you look at the approach, really, it affects it goes outside the usual binary of science and arts, because the approach really can be very beneficial, particularly to people from sociology, political science, socioanthropology, some aspects of history and others. So if we may find a way of also getting into people of these fields, it might be much more holistic, probably, than it is at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mbongi. And really, that's our objective. Remember, this course was advertised through the corporate division. We were targeting everybody, every one of the staff at the university. But, well, maybe the message was not crafted as such. And we use food systems because all of us eat. And if you eat wrong foods, then you become sick. So we need the medical people to join us and work with us. So the hub is under the Vice Chancellor's office. And so the target is the entire university. And please allow me to let Veronica say a few words. Veronica is from Sweden. She's part of us in the AgriFose program, and she supports us. We have collaborators from Sweden, but she supports us specifically in this hub. We have 3 hubs in the region. That's the Kenya hub, we have the Uganda hub, and we have the Zimbabwe hub. So Veronica from Sweden supports the Kenya hub. So Veronica, please welcome, say a few words. I'm sorry to ambush you, but I thought it will be so unfair if we close this down without you saying a few words.
It's okay, and thank you so much for letting me in to say a few words. I really appreciate being a facilitator from the Swedish side in the AgriFose2030 program, specifically focused on collaborating with the Kenya Hub and the flagship project here on food systems. And I've really seen firsthand how important and useful and productive this TOC methodology can be, especially with this kind of critical approach that many of you were also raising in your questions and comments, which makes the methodology also malleable to different contexts and perspectives, regardless of what kind of science you are working on. It can be useful in different ways. So it was great to see so many people joining today, and yeah, it's one of the excellent parts of this kind of work, that it can enable courses where people can meet from different areas, and also now in this excellent collaboration between the 3 universities in the hub. So I'm looking forward to following this, continuing with the excellent people involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Veronica. Tell them that you are not from the natural sciences, so
No.
that they know that we are all together in this. We have social scientists, we have and other disciplines.
Yes.
Veronica, you're from gender?
I'm actually, well, political scientist and environmental studies, but social science perspectives. So I'm looking at climate governance and these things. And I'm very used to cross-disciplinary collaboration where, you know, you might not always agree from the beginning or understand each other's perspectives, but through discussing and maybe through finding common language in this kind of model, even though we know it's not meant to be universalizing, so to speak, but it can create dialogue opportunities at the same time. So yes, cross-disciplinarity is also a very essential part of this kind of work. So yeah, thank you, Cecilia.
Yeah,
and
so
good work,
Professor
good
Mbongi,
work organizing this.
Thank you. So Professor Mbongi, you see, even in our team, we are not all from the natural sciences. We have all people in this, and we want this to be a university-wide program where people see the methodologies or the courses as really the foundation towards research for impact. So before we mount our next course on science translation, we'll have a webinar focusing on research to impact. And it will be delivered by a colleague from the University of Leeds. I hope you will sign up as many as you have done. We believe that having a webinar before the fiscal training course gives us some foundational insights, ideas, and knowledge that helps us grasp better the trainings when we go fiscal to really put into practice what we are learning and how we can apply the different methodologies or convert our products of research to inform policy and practice. So I think at this point, I will give Esther Nekesa, our communication and engagement support person, to give a vote of thanks. I hope you guys have evaluated the webinar because that's really important to us. In case there are things that we didn't do well, then it gives us a chance to improve. What we did really well gives us a chance to even push them more.
Prof,
Thank you
before
very
you
much.
hand over to Esther, there's a question that
Yeah,
has been raised by, before you hand over to Esther,
yeah.
there is a very important question that has been raised by a colleague from our Faculty of Law, Dr. Njoki Mboche. I don't know whether you saw it.
Sorry, I didn't see it, but you can read it, or she
it's
can
actually,
ask.
it's related to what I was asking earlier. The question she raises is whether the advert was put in a language that clearly stated
No.
that
Sorry,
that
Dean. Sorry. It's actually a confirmation that the
yes.
language was inclusive because I'm from the Faculty of Law, and so I was able to clearly see that it was meant for everybody.
Oh, thanks, Njoki.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So then, is it okay? Yeah?
Yeah, maybe again, very few of us, and this is from some little experience, very few of us read the emails, especially the forwards that we have from our university. So maybe Esther, Nekesa, and a few others who deal with communication, they may explore other ways of communicating to colleagues. Very few people read those emails. I'll guarantee you that, and I've tried to use them in some functions. You'll find that it's just very few people, and it's the same group that reads. And the majority of the people in the university don't read those emails.
Thank you for that, because then I try to share among the WhatsApp groups that I am in, but that's worth noting, and we will broaden the platforms where we share the webinars. Thank you very much. So Esther, please come in.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you everyone else for attending. I was just to give a vote of thanks. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to, of course, our main keynote speaker, Ms. Isabel, who has already left. Thank you, Veronica and team, for the support. And thank you to the research division of the University of Nairobi that has supported us. Can you hear me, Prof? Anyone can confirm whether they can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we are getting you.
Yes, they can hear me. Thank you to the DVC research division that has really supported the Kenya Hub. Thank you, Professor Cecilia, Justin Nyaga, and Justin from Embu University, Samuel from Maseno University, the Hub partners for in the planning and the execution of this. Lastly, I just saw someone asking when the call is likely to be sent out. It's going to be sent out immediately after this virtual webinar. So kindly, please keep checking your emails, and we will share as much as possible in all the other channels, Prof. We've had you. we've had the call, we've had the sentiment. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for your attendance. Do have a lovely afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.